Okay, today we're going to talk about The Culture of Narcissism, American Life in an Age of Diminishing Expectations by Christopher Lasch. Does anybody feel like giving a summary of all or some of the book?
I'll give my general summary is as we've become increasingly individuated by the process of capital, we have that gap between to fill in for the gap that we can no longer take care of ourselves. Life has increasingly been bureaucratized to essentially control and manage us as individuals who have no connection to each other, no decreasing social expectation and connection with each other.
So as we turn inward, we're sort of eroding the fabric of society, and this is bad in his view. It seems like this is basically a bit of a polemic. Is that fair?
Yeah, though I gotta be honest, I don't know what that word actually means.
An indictment.
Oh yeah, it's definitely it's definitely critical of the way in which our society is moving.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's probably a good place to start. I mean, I feel like I have most of my notes on the first chapter too, which was kind of like an overview maybe of what he thought. I don't know. Did anybody have like any really strong reactions or like? I guess I'll say that like I felt attacked. I'm trying to imagine what Christopher Lasch is like as a person. Like, does he not really see himself as a narcissist, or how did other people kind of respond to just his, I don't know, his idea?
Well, Mike, I will be honest. I definitely felt him talking about me a lot. But I will also say that I don't think he was attacking you. Similar to Marcuse, when he brought up Freud in the very beginning, he essentially pointed out that essentially personal maladies are to some degree social maladies. Like he saw that as being one of Freud's key insights, as Marcuse saw. So it's not exactly you to the degree that you mirror what he's saying.
Yeah.
It's not your so much personal responsibility. It's to some degree the way your society made you, and so you have to see it that way. And like a lot of our narcissistic problems is that we see, so like think about like climate change. How are we supposed to fight climate change? We're supposed to fight it like as an individual. We're supposed to recycle or like do our duty. We're supposed to buy organic products, like what is a truly social malady and a problem with our entire civilizational organization and method is now supposed to be your individual fault. And like, why aren't you doing your duty to the planet? Why aren't you buying organic, you bad individual?
Hey, I'm right there. I'll back you up right with that, Nathan. I think that that in a lot of I stand on this sort of side of this conversation of like nothing is really up to the individual, right? Like we are shaped by our societies and to the extent of almost calling into question free will. Like do we make any decisions for ourselves? So yeah, I agree that it's not that he's criticizing individuals as much as he's criticizing the culture. Christopher Lasch, that is, criticizing the culture of narcissism, right?
I thought there were a couple individual attacks that I really liked. Like he talks about how some of the radicals from the 60s basically ended up just going into like therapy in the 70s and pursuing like yoga and I don't know, diets and stuff like that. And then kind of looked back on the 60s as not being this like socioeconomic, movement, but just that they themselves were personally unhappy and how just much damage. It sounds like he's saying that this does a lot of damage to our idea of activism today.
I latched onto that for sure, which was the idea that the activists who are self-interest, who aren't actually, we're incapable of organizing because we're so obsessed with ourselves that we can't even effectively get together in groups and work against the same. So I thought that was a pretty good criticism for sure.
Part of me wonders if he's like subject to the same criticism that I feel like I brought this up with the board and I brought it up with Nietzsche, but like they treat history as just sort of, they oversimplify. And I feel like Lasch as a historian really shouldn't be doing it. Like I feel like he makes these kind of sweeping generalizations that people used to live for their ancestors, or people used to, work together without, focusing on themselves as individuals. Is that true? Like, can you even make a statement like that and back it up?
In one of the chapters, he does go more in depth with what he means by that.
What does he mean?
He talks about the early America. And how, like Ben Franklin, and the industry of the 17th century was, and essentially early capital in the America, was, yes, you're accumulating, but you're doing it for the community.
Yeah, you're raping and you're pillaging, but you're doing it so that your wives and children can have stability.
Yeah, Yeah, you're taming the wilds for the good of the people.
And that's what kind of creates that cult of lost innocence.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it now cynically and say, oh, well, they were just lying to themselves. They really just wanted to, they just were rationalizing their theft and barbarism, and he kind of says that himself, that it's kind of like the way that at the time, is like their super ego, was dominant and was all of, and so it kind of, how to put it, you got that sort of clash, whereas now I guess he sees it as being different, where overtly or on the outside, we're supposed to glorify ourselves, but then in a weird way, we're now more controlled than ever.
Yeah. I guess one other thing that I kind of reacted to is that he uses a lot of Freud. He talks a lot about, I don't know, our subconscious, our, I don't know, super ego. I have a quote up here somewhere. I don't know, basically just our unconscious drives and desires, and is at the same time pretty anti this culture of therapy and analysis. So I wonder why he's using the model of somebody that is very much focused on the individual in order to explain his argument. Does that make sense?
I think I can. I think I can explain that.
I noticed that too.
Wait, sorry, what's up?
I just said I noticed that too. It felt like lots of Freudian language for sure.
Okay, so here's my understanding of that, and this is kind of borrowing from Rick Roderick and his reading of the Frankfurt School, and that's the sense that Freud's project, as I've heard it, is essentially for analysis. You're supposed to render yourself apparent to yourself. You're supposed to become more enlightened about yourself. It's kind of like a furtherment of the Enlightenment project. Whereas the Frankfurt School, and I think Adorno put it, the culture of mass media, or a massively visual culture, is psychoanalysis reversed. So,
you're trying to make yourself conform to images that you're experiencing?
I got to be honest, I don't entirely understand. I can't say I fully wrapped my mind around the concept. All I can say is that, or where I see it in what he means by therapy, is that you yourself are I guess you probably put it best. You are a problem. You need to fit a general model. You need to, conform to an image.
Okay. So a psychological disease model.
Yeah. Well, do you remember? Have you guys ever seen that Twilight Zone episode where the woman who's coming of age, she has to pick what model she's gonna be? Have you guys not seen that?
I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah, she didn't want to, in this society, it's when you come of age, you pick there's 8 to 10 beautiful cookie cutter faces that you will get surgeryed into, both men and women.
And that's how you express yourself as an individual. You sort of have limited. It's kind of just that we think we have free will, but we just sort of have a couple options to choose from.
Yeah, it's instead of choosing how you want to live your life, you get to choose what brand of car you drive, or what brand of
okay. So
brand.
So I could be obsessive compulsive, or I could be schizophrenic, or I could be histrionic. Those are kind of my options. Although one of those options is narcissistic. So I don't know. What were you gonna say, friend? I'm sorry.
All narcissistic?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. I think they are all narcissistic. I think that that's the idea. It's all about the self. I have this. I think that the phrasing that Nathan used of psychoanalysis in reverse through mass media makes a lot of sense. It's I didn't know I had that problem until I was told that I had that. I didn't know that I was lacking in these different things.
But how?
Until I saw it, until I was told it, and so the psychological affliction almost is imposed upon. And then of course it's you see this mass media and you're like, oh, that must apply to me, that needs to apply to me.
I feel you can't. Don't you need signposts though to kind of have this internal investigation? You need anchors, right, to kind of move through. And even Freud, I think, didn't describe things in a vacuum. He frequently talks about our psyche in relation to our position in society. I feel even as far back as Freud, it wasn't psychoanalysis was a purely causa sui or internally generated process. It was a reflection of how we go about our lives in society.
Yeah, it is I almost think it's a chicken and egg type thing.
Yeah.
Did we produce the culture, or did the culture produce us? I hate to simplify it to that extent.
Have there been studies on just people who, I guess you can't, we've probably had this discussion, you can't survive on your own, from a child, right? There's no such thing as an asocial person.
Not a human. I mean,
they do those studies with the monkey, the fuzzy mesh mothers who still give them food but aren't actually alive, and how they die. They have all the nutrition they need, but because their mother is not a live animal, they end up dying compared to the monkeys that have their actual mother in a cage with them.
I think it's that they have the option of drinking from like a straw, or they have like a monkey stuffed doll that doesn't produce any sustenance, and they choose the doll for the sustenance.
Wire monkey that has like milk, and then like a stuffed monkey, and they like hold on to the stuffed monkey while they drink the milk from the wire monkey.
Oh, okay. That's a lot less heinous.
Yeah. But there's some scenario where they don't give the monkeys any social contact and they end up dying.
Then they just die. Yeah, they go crazy.
Yeah. But I'm loving this thread of the the psychoanalysis thing. But I also just want to make sure to acknowledge the history bit, whereas I really appreciate that Mike also called into question Christopher Lasch's like grasp of history, because the whole time I was searching for this link of like, why is the post-war era culture of narcissism, and I started. I similarly didn't make it very far in this book, but I did a lot of skimming, and I was looking for that nugget. Like, why is the post-war era the specific narcissism?
Well, isn't it television?
Right.
I mean, it's literally the image. It's the mass production of images that everyone's.
I'm going to put out a theory that's completely unfounded, but is that society didn't make us narcissistic. We became narcissistic, and then that influenced the direction of society. And I'd maybe even say the same thing about capitalism, that like capitalism came about and is largely being changed from capitalism into like late stage capitalism, not through, at least as much through psychological forces as through economic forces.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that the opposite of what he was saying, that our culture and social lives change because of the economic systems we choose?
Right. And again, totally unfounded, but both.
It's political economy. To the degree that he evokes and talks about capital and Marx, it's about political economy. It's not the economy alone affects things. It's that the economy relates to politics, and politics relates to the economy. Like, they're intertwined and intermeshed inextricably. And so you have economic forces change our politics. Politics changes our economic forces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And out of all this, I latched onto the chapter on education, where it described the sort of effect of capitalism on education in the United States. I don't know if you all got to that chapter. I definitely jumped straight to it. And it talked about how Christopher Lasch talked about how originally education was all about the humanities, right? These sort of like lofty, ideal version of education. And then come industrialization, there was this sort of, quasi-racist approach to it, very classist approach for sure, that just said, hey, stop teaching these people literature. We need them to know how to work with their hands. And that's when math and science entered education more strongly. There's some quote of William Ford wanting his workers to, they're not finishing high school, so he's asking for education to give these people skills to be able to work in an assembly after like middle school. And I think Christopher Lasch gets really elitist in this chapter, where he starts talking about how basically it's the fact that people are no longer being taught the sort of like historic pieces of literature and the sort of ideals of social sciences, and that is leading to what he called the stupefaction of the entire society, right? And I thought that was interesting. It's definitely I saw that as a very direct link for the big critique of capitalism in that chapter.
Fran, I'd be curious, as a teacher or someone who's are you still a teacher?
Yeah, I'm more a teacher now than I was before the pandemic, probably.
Okay, I was just curious, like, what your thoughts are on modern education, and like, especially since, say, like, No Child Left Behind.
Yeah, No Child Left Behind was a disaster, and we've actually stepped very far. We're in a new era now. We don't do Left Behind type of stuff anymore. We still get federal funding through that type of like statewide testing, but I sort of am of the same mentality that you were sort of alluding to when you said economics and politics are one and the same, right? Like they sort of are mirrors for you. In the same way, it's like our culture is shaped by what we teach our kids, and it's definitely a mirror of what we believe in based on what we teach our kids. So I don't really believe in like a sort of like saying that any one subject matter is more important than another, as much as I believe in I guess just not traumatizing children, which we're doing better at. We're doing a better job now than we ever were before. There's a lot less angry teachers in the classrooms.
I feel like Eddie and Fran, I read something he was talking about and I wanted your take, where, let me find the exact quote. He said, one of the essential aims of the educational process was to eliminate antagonism. Do you think that I guess that's kind of what you're saying, or do you think that's true?
Antagonism from like the people we're educating?
No, I think antagonism between people, like trying to just make us into more sociable people, and that's what education is.
Yeah. Did he give an example of I'm just not sure what that means exactly.
Yeah, sorry. According to Eric Fromm, Americans had lost the capacity for spontaneous feeling, even for anger. One of the essential aims of the educational process was to eliminate antagonism, to cultivate a commercialized friendliness. If you do not smile, you are judged lacking in a pleasing personality, and you need a pleasing personality if you want to sell your services, whether as a waitress, a salesman.
I can chime in with something tangentially related to that, which is that I work at a charter school, and there's been like a huge shift in how we are treating students' behaviors recently. When we first started, I don't know, there's been a lot of like looking back at how we used to do things and saying like this is kind of like a white supremacist way of dealing with our students, which is that we had these expectations of students to like these strict uniform guidelines for these elementary school kids, this thing called like 90-90-90, which is 90-degree angles on how you're sitting with your back and your feet and like your legs in the chair, and then just like constant corrections on when you talked out of turn, if you said something inappropriate, stuff like that. And it was pretty much policing their behaviors and trying to like mold them into people that would fit well into society the way it is. And there's been a huge change in that with new leadership, just saying like, this is really like messed up. This is us trying to shape students' behaviors to distance themselves from their own cultures to fit more into like a white dominant culture. I don't know if that's...
I didn't realize you worked in a charter school. I'm very happy that criticism was turned down to you because, I would cringe every time that some charter school language made it into school. That, like words like track to the speaker and like these like call and response things where like all of a sudden, it's almost like the classroom is manipulated to just like Pavlovian dogs, right? Like you ring the bell and all of a sudden everyone drops everything, like puts their hands on their head or something.
All charter schools have different charters and methods, but it sounds like you probably heard like achievement first language, which is where I work. Okay, that's like absolutely how it was when I first started a couple years ago, and now it's been completely changed. We don't have any kind of we don't even give negative feedback or corrections the same way we used to.
There were a handful of documentaries, a lot of articles written about like the whole PIP model in New York City, I think.
Them too.
The most black,
and we've had all kinds of other problems, like a principal at our flagship school, like slamming a kid into a locker. Just a lot of bad optics. So there's been a lot of change.
Bad optics.
It's hyper controlling, right? Like it's complete control of the students. And what they were finding is, because this is the great new experiment in education is charter schools, right? They were finding that these schools were very good at placing all of these kids who otherwise wouldn't have made it into college. They were very good at getting them into college, right? Right, Eddie? That was the big thing for charter schools. But then they found that they all dropped out. They all couldn't survive their freshman year.
Yeah, the entire model is like setting them up to be good at getting into, so it's getting good test scores, writing essays. Like they brag about how 99% of the students that graduate our high schools get into college, but you like can't get to our high school ready to get into. It's like a kind of a backwards way of dealing with education. So statistics based. It's all data based.
If you let's just assume that public education really sucked when it first started, right? Like in the Industrial Revolution. And I guess it kind of sounds like it's pretty bad lately. Was there a point at which it sort of reached its peak in your view, or is it getting better, or what's the overall trend?
I definitely can't speak for public education or pedagogy in general, so maybe Fran can answer that.
I have opinions. Maybe I'm just more headstrong in my opinions than you, Eddie, but what I'll say is I really see it as an equity issue, first and foremost. Sure, you can point to certain schools all throughout American history and say, wow, like that was their golden era of education. But we've always left poor people behind. And now what Obama did a really good job of, and what it sounds like Biden is going to pick up, with his wife working in a community college and all, is the more equitable approach to education, which is like just broader strokes, right? Like making community college free and whatnot, I think is really the right way to go when you have a massive population in the United States. You always have to, you can have, we had incredible education in West Hartford, Michael and I. Yeah. And it just, that was at the cost of a place like Hartford having terrible education. And I would, of course, argue on behalf of like leveling it out a little bit. And I think that's the trajectory, is leveling things out a little.
Well, that's good. That would be the only area in which modern life seems to be leveling out.
Yeah.
So I didn't make it to the end of the book, but does Christopher Lasch offer any pointers or advice for going forward? Or does it just kind of end on, yeah, you're really narcissistic?
Actually, I also didn't make it to the end, and I kind of had a question leading up to that.
Oh, yeah.
I only got so far as like, I'm talking about, like you said earlier, the hippie movement in the 60s turning into like a self-help kind of therapy yoga movement. And I just wasn't seeing, like, from the synopsis I've read, I kind of understand what the problem with that is, but the way he was presenting it was clearly like in a kind of, he felt disdain towards those behaviors, but I didn't really see the problem with that. Like it sounds a lot like how I live right now, and he wasn't making a strong case for me to sell.
Did you also see in that sort of same line of conversation? I don't know if anyone clicked on that Reddit link that I put in the chat, but there's a lot of people tying Christopher Lasch's criticism of activist movements directly to like current moment identity politics, right? How he criticized identity politics, I guess. You know, I didn't gather this as much from the text itself as much as I did from like analyses of the text itself. There's a lot of criticism as well as support for Lasch when it came to his commentary on like people getting all wrapped up in who's saying what instead of the actual cause.
Well, I didn't see your Reddit post, and I'm sure our listeners didn't see it either. Do you want to like give a brief summary of what they were talking about?
Sure.
Well, I can probably summarize the point. I mean, that was from a stupid poll, right?
Yeah. What is that?
So I had never heard of this subreddit before, but it's a subreddit for very far left-leaning progressive people who hate identity politics. Nathan, maybe you know more. Take it away.
No, well, I can't. I guess because that's just this water I swim in. At least I don't actually know that subreddit that well. But you know, I looked at the sidebar, and you know, they've got like Adolf Reed. You know, so like I feel like I can maybe summarize it a little bit.
Right. They also had that article that I think you linked to once, Michael. That was a criticism of the white fragility author.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess the most simple way I'd put it, I mean, this is actually shit. I'll just steal from Adolf Reed because he put it much better. You know, how some of the demands that are asked for in the politics world, how could you possibly build a mass political movement or a mass politics when all you care about is 10% of the population? You know, it's just essentially it's not a real politics in terms of advocating or asking for more distribution or a wider equitable distribution for all people. So in a certain sense, ID politics is not left politics. You know, what it is it's a very useful weapon to bully the left and, you know, prop up, you know, certain very rich minority people, you know, or very privileged people that are also minority, you know.
So you're saying black Marxists should just not talk about black issues? No, I'm totally kidding.
No.
I'm totally kidding.
No, see, again, it's not that. It's not again that that Black lives don't matter or something like that. You know, that Black Lives Matter is not a legitimate movement. You know, it's not that. You have to deny or should deny that there are problems facing black people like disproportionate. Mm-hmm. The point is you can't reject Medicare for all because it doesn't specifically target black people.
Right. I think that's what DeBoard was talking about too, that like,
or healthcare for all, because Medicare for all is already just such a compromise.
Yeah, I think DeBoard talked about it as this over, and again, you can't ignore race, but by over focusing on race, it detracts from class, and it's through class at which a large body would be activated to go into.
Yeah, but then, you know, of course, they get smeared, or like I know Adolf Reed's been smeared as a class reductionist. You know, like, oh, you only care about, you know, white working class people or whatever, you know.
Well, what was this post about? I feel like we didn't actually get the summary of it.
The post was largely about the sort of identity experience. About
okay.
Those basic, you know, we were not straying from what this post was about. This is
oh, okay.
I think that I think I'll add that, just, you know, my opinions aside, like Lasch is drawing this very direct line and very rational with the culture of narcissism and identity politics being ineffective activism, because, you know, it's this obsession over the individual. It's like, who is saying what? He thinks only narcissistic people really care what the person looks like, how they sound, and how they're representing. You know, he sees a movement as a total, you know, disembodiment of a person. It's a, by definition, faceless thing. And so he thinks that would be more effective.
I wonder if he would be a collectivist, like believing that it's some sort of force in itself to a group. I guess that's kind of hard to deny.
Right.
Maybe I'm thinking of a collective essentialist, which says that certain groups of people have to be.
Well, so if I may, like, come back to that question of what is Lasch advocating for, at least what I read into in the various sort of like fluff that I read and watched around this, is that he's all about family matter. In fact, I was very curious who picked this book. If it was you, Michael, because you are with a fresh family on your hands over there.
No, I'll tell you.
He really believes in the family unit.
I'll tell you why I picked this book. It's because I posted my last essay about irony on critical theory on the subreddit, and one person responded and he said, "This is not very insightful. You should read Christopher Lasch." So
Really,
that's why I suggested it. I'm glad he said that, because it was a really good book. You know? Yeah, totally. I'm kind of. Oh, please.
Just to wrap up that thought, though, about the Family Matters thing, it seems like a lot of people have really taken to Christopher Lasch. A very niche group of people love Christopher Lasch. It's funny how when you talk about him, some people know him very well and other people seem to have never heard of him.
I had never heard of him.
Liberals. Yeah, but it seems to be the far left people who have this conservative bone in them, right? Like they believe in family matters. They believe they believe in sort of like ignoring identity politics, but they are on the far left. It's the original Bernie bro, right?
I feel like Lasch is a social conservative. I feel like Lasch is a social conservative is what I got. I'd say he's on the far left economically, but not.
Hey, can I just bring something up here?
Yeah.
And that's the fact that when we talk about conservatives, and like in a certain sense, I feel like leftists are more conservative in a lot of ways than, say, like the Republican right, in the sense that they want to preserve like human dignity and human life. And the right and the Republican and, you know, what we call conservative wants to conserve like capitalist power relations.
I don't know if that's a fair comparison, because when you talk about progressive or conservative, I think it describes more like your reaction to something that's happening that's largely amoral, like a political system or...
I'm not just talking about like left or right reactionary.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying in the sense that if you're anti-capitalist, you know, or even if you're Marxist, I mean, it doesn't mean you're like, say, like you want like Zizek's made the point that what's revolutionary or what's non-capitalist about like a million different gender identities that each have their own like dress code and products that you need to, you know, consume to embody some identity. Like that's the perfect for like the logic of late stage capitalism.
I don't know. Can't you fashion like a grass skirt? Do you have to buy it? Can't you express yourself without
going back
consumption?
To the 60s? Like my aunt told me a story how, you know, she was like, she grew up on the East Coast, and, you know, there everyone's like, you got, you know, inside the like Washington Beltway, you know, you got to be like, you know, it was like a certain sort of norm, you know, you like very conventional, you know, like standards of like what's high class and not. She comes to California and the West Coast, and she found that there's the exact same culture, but instead of like, oh, you know, like Brooks Brothers shirts or something, it's like, oh, I've got like this handmade India, like organic thing from India, you know, like right. there's always a certain like stratification of like commodity, you know, and just because you're not like climbing one pyramid, you know, one hierarchy, you know, of the commodity like spectacle, you know, and the identity that you're trying to promote yourself as, you know, doesn't mean you're not climbing another.
Right.
You know, like there's, oh my God. But just like to go back to this thing about the modern like protest, like look at Antifa. Like what use do they have politically? Like what are they going to achieve politically?
I mean, you could push if you buy into the Overton window thing, and I said it wrong last time. Yeah, it was Dunbar's number. But Overton window, then there could be just potentially pushing dialogue further to leftist values by being like.
But do you see that? Do you see the like?
I think so.
I see reaction. I just see this is disgusting. These people are crazy.
That too.
Let's not do that.
Yeah, well, no, that happens. Oh, sorry, friend. Go on.
I just wanted to respond to that quickly with this sort of, I think it's Freudian, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but like the way that this psychology isn't so straightforward, and, you know, like someone, you know, by being in the news, right? Like this is how Trump got elected, right? Even though the news constantly cast him as disgusting and gross, you have a lot of people out there who think of themselves as disgusting and gross. So then when you tell them like, hey, you're disgusting and gross, and guess what? Antifa or Trump is disgusting and gross, then all of a sudden you get these people who might identify with.
Wow.
And there's this big self-deprecating machine out there, especially in this country right here and now, where if you tell someone something is gross, they're more inclined to do it rather than less inclined, right? Like we have a whole country where that's basically the modus operandi.
Like they get off on shock value.
Exactly. Tell them something's wrong, and they're like, oh, I'm a bad boy. I'm going to do that wrong thing.
So how does that relate to Antifa? Oh, you're not saying that Antifa protesters are doing that, but rather that
the portrayal.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're essentially saying that Antifa can gather people to their cause to the degree that there are people who want to like play that role, right?
Right.
Yeah, like you tell your conservative aunt that you're Antifa at Thanksgiving dinner.
Right. You get off on that.
Yeah, and so and then there's a uniform that you can buy, and I'm sure like a clever capitalist is already selling like your black bloc uniform, right?
I feel like I disagree with that though, because I don't think that consumption is a necessary part. Like I think you could make your own Antifa gear. Like it doesn't have to be bought, or like you can express yourself. You can express yourself without consumption, and as the observer, like us looking at the person, we don't actually know whether they consumed or not. It makes no difference to us, so it has no material effect, the actual consumption.
See, but it had to be produced somehow. So like again, this gets to the whole Fran's like couch in the last episode, the commodity of the spectacle, or the society of the, and just like how is a repurposed, isn't repurposed furniture or like recycled, isn't that just another, it's still a commodity. It's still produced by.
I don't think we can let perfect be the.
It's just a way to repurpose it. It's a way to like achieve a second like sale out of it.
I don't think perfect can be the enemy of good, and I think you have to look at recycling as a positive, even if it is operating through consumptive channels.
And it's not about the link to Antifa, right? Like they are at the word itself, right? Anti-fascist. I can get behind it. The word anti-fascist makes its way into the news a little more often. That's a net gain for society, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of what my point was, is that like I don't know if I completely buy into this, but by having language, we're more able to use, fight things. Like we have language to combat social issues with that we didn't have 200 years ago. Like the idea that all people should be free. Like that's a relatively new construct, and it serves as like the basis for many other more advanced social arguments.
Agreed.
So
I wonder though, like, is Antifa's stated goal to actually move the Overton window, or are they like, this is what's right and we need to push this exact agenda and we're not going to like settle for less than the agenda, or is it like the result of them doing that moves the Overton window so it's a good thing in general and then not like a thing we should try to stop?
I think the most charitable reading of Antifa, their intentions would be like black bloc tactics for leftist revolution, like sort of like culture jamming, maybe just like I bet it's like a form of accelerationism. Like you're just trying to break things to the point where things have to change, and there's sort of like a left influenced accelerationism that tries to replace it with something better. And I think there's also kind of like this right wing accelerationism, like the Dark Enlightenment thing that tries to make it probably just worse.
I don't know. I don't think I'd put Antifa in that accelerationist camp.
Yeah.
I think I'm probably more sympathetic to them. But does everyone remember the Hong Kong protests where like lots of ordinary people were suddenly like studying SWAT team tactics in order to counteract them, and like putting traffic cones over tear gas canisters and all that jazz? We're going to be very grateful if, assuming the great fascists, overtake us, and they are sending their, it just happened in Portland. I do not envy the situation there. Like, there was a police crackdown, and we need, I think Antifa is, I think I would have been labeled as Antifa were I part of those crowds, right? Because I just think the police were wrong, right? And we need to counteract that with strategy. And that's all that I read into what Antifa was doing, right? Like that was a crucial moment for society. Someone had to stand up and say, this is too far. And so thank you, Antifa, or whoever identified as Antifa in Portland at that time, standing up and just being like, this is obscene, please stop, I
think I think the really tough part is that people can't agree on what Antifa is. Like, to me, Antifa are black bloc protesters, but to you, Antifa means anti-fascist.
Anti-fascist strategic protesters. Right? Yeah.
I mean, I like that part. Also, I kind of feel like maybe this fascist, I think the fascist boogeyman is doing a lot more harm than good. I'm as a Jew, I'm really not getting the fascist vibes. I'm just getting like.
But Mike, you weren't there for the first one,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
not that you're wrong. I mean, I definitely think. Well, like, let's remember, the last time someone was literally Hitler was Obama. Like Glenn Beck.
Yeah. Here's what I mean to say is, I'm sorry to cut you off. What were you saying?
No, go.
It's that we're focusing. It's giving us like a spectacle to focus on. Like, it's basically like saying like that third world dictator is the bad guy, and if we beat him, we're all good guys, and it takes your eyes off of what is actually causing the problem. And that's what is happening with fascism now. Is we're blaming things on fascism, but fascism is more of like the symptom.
I hear you, but I think we're coming full circle, or at least my own mind is going full circle to identity politics, where I think it's easy for white people sitting at home to say there's no fascists. But if you're a black person, literally driving your car is cause to get shot in this country. And that's pretty fascist behavior, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're not part of the group that, someone was writing somewhere on the internet today. Sorry, I don't have any link for that at all. But someone was saying how like a lot of us, even us who think we're doing a good job, like if you're white in the United States right now and you relate it to the Empire Strikes Back, we're the people chilling in the Death Star right now, thinking life is good. We aren't the ones under the gun of this fascist.
I guess the reason that I'm really hesitant to paint fascists as like the target is because I think that what causes people to become fascist is a reaction to what causes a lot of people to become radicalized to the left. Like it's clear that something's not working.
Right.
And I think that if we dig in too hard to, I'm sorry, it sounds really cliche, but I think if we just dig in too hard to labels or identity politics, then it's going to sort of obscure what the problem actually is and prevent cooperation. Like you're sort of drawing these territories, and they're not being drawn.
Forcing
correctly.
People to pick camps.
Yeah,
I agree. I think we have to be very gentle with the sensitive white male in this country.
He's our greatest ally.
Yeah, and if you pose the question in too scary of a way to them, they tend to become they tend to align with Trump. Sorry, we're getting way sidetracked.
I was going to ask. I was going
to
ask if you guys thought Christopher Lasch was a Marxist.
I thought he was an anti-capitalist.
Yes, so not a Marxist.
I'd put him in Marxist, just in the sense that I'd say he accepts Marx's critique of political economy. Like he sees the world, or he's looking at the world and analyzing the world through that lens.
Yeah, like he'll use terms like bourgeoisie and proletariat. I think he did in there.
Yeah, it's way more than that, Mike. Like the critique of capital is like in every line.
Yeah.
Like that's what I've been curious why you guys haven't. I felt I'm not sure if just because I'm just so in the like Marxist like mind space or whatever that like because I also just kind of see things in that lens as well. It's been interesting how you guys don't, I guess, see it through that same lens. Or
I mean, I think it's a model, and it's a really, really good one, and I am optimistic about it. I'm also just kind of interested. Like I've noticed that we're reading a lot of modern philosophy is Marxist, and I'm kind of curious if we're in the middle of like a sampling. If we're in the middle of a trend, or I don't know. I still have the same values that like Marxists espouse. And Marxism seems to be a pretty useful vehicle for those values, but I just sort of resist Marxism being this like dominant force in philosophy.
I don't think you understand it at all.
I think if I can say I think that the current philosophical division is between, and Lasch was this type of elitist, right? Like those who engage in the greater history of philosophy and those who are anti-intellectual, right? Like anti-intellectualism is a philosophy of its own. I think we can all agree. And that is the opposition. And there is plenty published on their behalf. It's on Fox News and it's Ayn Rand and it's out there, right? So we could read that. I just think none of us really agree.
Yeah, and it's like I feel like I'm coming across negatively, and that's totally. I've been enjoying every single reading, and I'm planning on reading a lot more. Like I feel like it's critical theory that I'm most interested in. I didn't really even know that was a thing until like a month ago. But
oh my God, I love that video. That just spelled it out perfectly. Nathanology. Did everyone watch that?
The one where he sings?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that one. Yeah. Yeah, and that Plastic Pills channel is also really good. Yeah, I don't know. I think what was the question?
The question was, is all modern philosophy Marxist?
Yeah. I also sort of just want to read like accelerationist stuff. I feel like that's kind of the next. Like I just want to. I feel like.
If I might push back a little against that because there is this great American movement. I took this class back in college, American philosophy, where we talked a lot about the pragmatists, which they're not Marxists per se, but they are sort of adjacent. It's from the same similar era, like turn of the century.
Yeah, William James.
William James and Pierce, and there was some good stuff in there. And I think that through those guys, you get this straight line to modern philosophers like Richard Rorty. I think Marxism is almost like just it's like embedded in everyone's sort of take these days.
Yeah, and I think there's like a Marxist epistemology or Marxist, maybe even, I don't know, Marxist metaphysics or something, but it's like larger than I'm giving it credit for. Like Marx or Marxist thinkers talk a lot about time, like the historical time in that DeBoard book.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
And the pragmatists, maybe I don't know what you would take from them, but their philosophy sort of summed up in that you are what you do, right? And I definitely hear that echoed constantly, both in this group and just also in our culture at large, is that it doesn't matter what you think if your actions don't reflect that. And that's a niche philosophy that isn't universal, but we sort of accept it as that our actions speak louder than our words.
Right.
And so
is it not like just necessarily true. That because like if you don't do anything good, are you a good person?
That's the American philosophers would agree with you, but that's not universal,
Yeah. I feel like I wanted to ask about this David Foster Wallace interview that was posted. I didn't get a chance to watch it, but Eddie, did you want to go through it or like?
I watched it a long time ago. They go through a lot of stuff. It's like a really interesting, just like look at who he is kind of. But then I don't know. The part I remember really liking at the end was it's pretty sharply in contrast to the way that political movements have been going recently. And I'm just wondering like how you guys think this contrasts. He talks about how I forget what the interviewer asked. She asked like, what will like change or a revolution look like? And he says that it would look that when there is meaningful change, it's going to be very quiet. It's going to be a lot of introspection and people doing their own research and changing their own minds and figuring things out for themselves. He says he doesn't like loud things. He'd prefer things to be quiet and for change to be affected that way. I don't know if you remember that part of the interview, Nathan, but it kind of stuck with me, and I'm trying to like figure out how to reconcile it with the way that change has been best affected in the last year or two.
Yeah, I don't remember that specifically. What I very strongly remember about that interview, I mean, I feel like he essentially talks about, say, the society of the spectacle or culture of narcissism from a different. He talks about what I see to be the society of the spectacle and culture of narcissism talking about in our world, and kind of the how it relates to your own kind of sense of self, and particularly how you can't be sincere. How kind of everything comes with this sort of cynical distance. As soon as you start to talk about, like serious things or, what was considered serious in an earlier time, it just comes off as like sappy or corny.
Oh, sorry.
And that is what I
go.
Yeah, I was going to say, I forgot if I brought this up last time, but it feels like we have a need to sort of maintain this ability to like swallow capitalism. Like it's just really tough to swallow, and so the more irony we consume, it kind of like keeps that like pathway nice and like clean and working. And it's
And this was Christopher Lasch was a huge critic of irony, wasn't he? Somewhere in this book, I think I listened to some sort of like analysis where he just dug in, saying that irony is sort of like us just barely being able to face reality. So we create this, just like you're saying, Michael, we create this distance.
Well, in that interview with David Foster Wallace, he says that he heard somewhere that irony is the sound of a bird that has come to love its cage.
Nice. I like that. Yeah. I was reminded a lot of his book. He wrote a short story called Good Old Neon. Have any of you guys read this?
I have not.
It was in like the Very Bad Wizards podcast episode, so that got me interested. But it's about this like corporate executive who's like in his 20s and is I think he's decided to kill himself, and it's just like an explanation of why. And he sort of just goes through his life of just being unable to like attach to anything and really being just unable to feel when he felt like he was supposed to. And he basically just feels like he's a big phony and can't deal with the pain of it all. And like he's gone to therapy and he just feels like a phony like during therapy, and he's like saying what the therapist wants to hear and stuff like that. But it's really, really good. And it's not that long. I think it's like 10 or 15 or 20 pages. But I was reminded of it during this because he's talking about these like how we've kind of just turned into like this Mad Men style corporate executive that is really just more concerned with, I don't know, outperforming their peers or getting like supplication from their, from the people who report to them than we are like actually producing quality work. So I don't know. It kind of came back to David Foster Wallace in my mind.
Well, I thought the best visual accompaniment to that section of the book was American Psycho.
Yeah, totally.
Where essentially no one's really doing anything. Like what work people are doing is hard to tell. It seems like they're much more performing some like facsimile of like productivity or.
I will point out though that David Foster Wallace hated Bret Easton Ellis, the guy who wrote American Psycho, and I think it was because he felt like Bret Easton Ellis was like selling irony. It would be my guess that he's like
he was glamorizing it, perhaps.
That would be my take, yeah.
But as long as we are citing media examples of this, I will never forget. A sort of life-changing moment was that one South Park episode, which maybe you all recall, where I think it's Stan's dad can't stop being sarcastic, and he gets to this line where he's like tearing up, and the wife is like, "Can't you ever stop being sarcastic?" And he's just like, "No, I need help. Please help me." He's like crying while he's saying
That's hilarious. I have not seen that.
And I think it's so true, right? Like I can definitely identify with that experience. Irony has been on my mind these past 2 weeks, and I'll say that, I'm someone who is sarcastic from time to time, and I enjoy it thoroughly. I think a more lighthearted take on sarcasm, if you don't like live and die by it, it's kind of just like, I'm bored, like life is a little too easy. And so it's fun to play this game of sarcasm, right? It's just a little bit of extra mental gymnastics. You can take the easy route and just sort of like phase out and just nod your head, or you can make a stupid pun. And there's something fun about that like mental gymnastics.
Well, also there's no humor without irony. I feel like every joke is ironic because you're basically turning something that's one thing into something that's another thing, which is
unexpected.
Yeah, exactly, the unexpected. I feel like what I was kind of reminded of by what Nathan was saying about American Psycho is that like there's people that will watch movies like that, or movies like Scarface or like Wolf of Wall Street, and they just read it as like people having a really fucking good time.
Well, that's like a big criticism of all Scorsese movies, isn't it? That Scorsese is glamorizing violence.
Yeah, that he's not as deep as people think he is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a huge Scorsese fan. I feel like if I was a Catholic, I would like him more, but a lot of his themes don't really land. Did anybody else have any thoughts about the culture of narcissism?
I had a lot of thoughts, and it comes down to this family values thing. One thing that I wanted to tap back into was this conversation about like progressive versus conservative, and whether it's economic or culture or society, or what do you call it, family values type of social concern. And I just think all the way back to the original use of progressive as a political platform, and that was the sort of like electrification of communities. And in general, I see the word progressive historically meant, bringing technology to the masses, right? It's just propelling us forward. And I guess the big question of the culture of narcissism is this intersection between technology and the personality traits that it has produced, right? Is that bad? We need to it's sort of like an intervention. This book comes out in the 70s, and it's an intervention of like, all right, we've gotten ahead of ourselves. Our technology has advanced faster than our ability to sort of like deal with it. And we're definitely there now in 20.
I wonder,
our technology is totally in its grip. So
I wonder if maybe we can't quite separate technology from people in the same sense that we can't separate people from society. Like take the iPhone, for example, and people spending all this time on Instagram. Do we do that because we have an iPhone, or does having an iPhone just make these like things that we want to do anyway a lot easier? And so it's not really the technology. The technology is really just acting as an accelerant for what's already there. Or do you think the technology really does have kind of a mind of its own, and it's taking us in a particular direction?
It exploits natural features. It's like I forget who compared it to this, but humans like sweet things because usually sweet things mean they have carbohydrates, and then sugar, like raw processed sugar, was invented, and now we like are becoming morbidly obese because we're eating candy and stuff and soda all the time. It's like the same way with social media technology. We have these natural inclinations to get social feedback and be socially accepted, and this is the sugar of that feature of our minds.
I guess then what would be any sort of alternative? Would it be taking a sort of paternalistic approach to curbing impulses? I guess that's reasonable. Sounds reasonable.
I think I don't know what the resolution is. I think it's like I've recently chosen to most social media because I personally can't handle it. I think a lot of people actually can, but I have a bit of a more addictive personality and realized what it was doing.
Yeah. I had to reactivate my Facebook to cyberstalk somebody, and it was awful. I got in and I got out.
Yeah.
That's what I have a 25-digit random password, and I still reactivate my Facebook like once every 2 weeks to check on somebody. It's really sad.
I will say, Eddie, though, you are probably the most Luddite. You turned me on to this like app which just turns your phone into grayscale, which was I think it's just a setting. It's
been like 3 years now.
Yeah, and that was awesome. Although I feel like I need the color. I
gotta be honest, it doesn't help. It doesn't really change anything.
Oh, I thought it helped so much. Everything's so depressing when I look at my phone. Yeah, and when I turn the color back on, it hurts because like then you can see like what they're doing. Like we need these ultra saturated colors because that's what is gonna like get the attention of whoever's using this device.
Right, it's like there's all this commentary on the use of red for the notification.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a little red dot.
I don't know. Isn't
Oh man!
Aren't you sort of like doing You're doing like a self Harrison Bergeron. You're like intentionally crippling yourself. Like you're cutting off color. I mean, not that it's a bad thing, but that's one way of looking at it.
I want to I applaud Eddie for his individualized intervention. I do think that like that's a best case scenario is that people individually like deal with this, but that's not going to happen on a societal level. We need maybe I'm biased because I'm in education, but I really do think that what we need, like you have these handful of individuals who had a very good education producing technology and then doling it out to the population at large. So people who aren't ready for it are sucked in, manipulated, exploited, etc. What we just need is everyone to just be there mentally, like calm, collect, like if we are all like feeling satiated in our lives, like I'd say now that you're a dad, Michael, you can turn the color on, you can log on to Facebook all you want because it's no longer the most important thing in your life. You've got another thing that really is going to just be more important.
I feel like this conversation is a perfect example of when you said that leftists can actually be really conservative.
Expand on that. I'm sure I agree.
Like you're basically saying
value human life.
Yeah, you're basically saying like we should not use things recklessly so that like we can be like the way we want to be, so that we can like stay that way. And I guess the alternative would be like sort of letting technology run away with it and really just turn like we'd lose control of what we turn into. And to me, that kind of felt like conservatism, which is like trying to stay in one place. And I'm not saying that we should run amok and be thoughtless about it. But I just kind of wanted to point out that like that's what you were saying about leftists actually kind of being conservative. Does that make sense?
Well, Mike, in Christopher Lasch, you probably missed it. It was probably later than where you stopped, but he essentially makes the point that left, or socialism does not just aspire to a full stomach, but a full life. Because a full stomach, you can be a slave with a full stomach. The point is, how can you be a full human being?
Beautiful.
I don't know what a full human being is, though. I guess is what I'm saying. Is there like
that's the point of the book, is that our society, our bureaucratized,
I don't think we've ever known
narcissistic society is preventing you from ever finding that out.
I mean, I think knowing what you want is more of like a product of having like a healthy brain. I don't think that there's like a universal answer of like what human beings should be.
And you could take the meta conversation and be like, there's evidently you think people should have the wherewithal to be able to evaluate what they want. I think anyone would agree with that. I'll agree with that for sure. It should be up. I think that's what we strive for as liberals, right? The liberal camp is the more individualistic, more narcissistic camp of just like, the broader spots. What do all the different people need more of?
Yeah,
whereas
totally.
The conservative camp is like, we, the majority, want to be in charge. Our way of life is right. We don't have room for your individualized needs. It is confusing and complicated in terms of like, what we call left and what we call right, because it's been oversimplified.
Yeah. I guess I'm just struggling in my mind to think of like, what is the fundamental difference between the left and the right? I'm sure there's like a good succinct answer, but I'm kind of failing to put my finger on it.
I think you can put as far as like politics goes, it's institutions versus business.
Well, I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, I'd say the biggest problem is that the Democratic Party has entirely ruined the notion of what left is, because they want to be the same. They want to be Republicans, so it's very important that there not be any conception of a left.
Okay, so putting aside what the Democrats have done, what would you say is the fundamental difference between left and right?
I mean, I think the right believes that you ought to be, how do you call it? I'd say you ought to be subservient, to some hereditary ruler, be that through, some historic lineage of aristocracy or through the previous round of capitalist accumulation. I believe the left, aspires for all people, to live lives of dignity, on equal footing.
What would you say about like libertarians? Are they left or right?
I think libertarians, well, that's a hard one, because in a certain sense, there's a lot of overlap between, like, I got to be honest, I kind of ended up back in the Marxist, area, kind of by going through libertarianism, like, especially like some of the Austrian school people. Because again, if you really believe, if you really analyze our country through the libertarian lens, you get very interesting, like, just looking at how the Fed worked, in a certain sense, libertarians and, because Marx, again, I think Marx has more in relation to libertarians, at least in the sense of like the critique of the state and of institutions, than any of the, say Jacobin or DSA left.
So yeah, right, Marx is more anarchist than statist. I was going to say communist, because I think we associate communism with statism after Russia and China. Okay, well, so basically, sorry, friend.
No, I think there's something interesting going on there, because I think to add to the left versus right question, in the United States, there's these very apt titles, right? Republicans and Democrats. And I think that boils them down pretty well too, right? Republicans believe in sort of like limited representation, right? Like you elect people who then represent you, whereas Democrats believe in every vote counts, right? That's always been a sort of divide in this country of, do we do this like state rights thing, or do we all like fly under the same flag?
Yeah, I think that
Republicans in general lean towards state rights, but that's very unique to the United States, because then you talk about like China and Russia, and they are thoroughly statist.
Well, the states' rights piece is interesting because I totally agree that the right, and it's kind of what Nathan is saying too. It's like the right believes in submission to people, and the left believes in freedom. And so the right believes in like elected representatives, the left believes in direct democracy. But then if you talk about states' rights, the analogy would be the right believes in states' rights, the left believes in anarchism. But I think we have a tendency, at least among the left, that the left believes in like a federal government. I don't know. I mean, I don't always equate leftism with anarchism.
I guess I think of libertarians as like the rational, they followed the sort of line of thinking of the word freedom, and that's like where you land is libertarianism, if you just like think about it a lot, but it's ignoring the sort of reality of the situation, which is that businesses reign supreme, and if you end up with oligarchy if you go all in on libertarianism, not freedom, right?
Yeah.
So
feudalism.
So now I will also add that in Latin America, the word liberal and liberalism is a bad word, right? Because it's associated with much like in Iraq today, right? Like you show that up there, and there's all these jokes, all these memes now of like, we're going to liberate you equals we're going to bomb the crap out of you, right? Like
they associate it with
Europe.
States.
What's that?
They associate it with Europe.
They associate it with the United States bombing.
Oh, okay.
That but in Latin America, it's associated with like banana republics, right? Like we're going to show up and liberalize your country, meaning we're going to hand it over to American businesses. We're going to liberalize your economy, meaning we are going to take away your version of the Fed, right?
Gotcha. Okay, and that's like the Evo Morales and like Bolivia and Peru, and I feel like I have not been following South American politics very well.
Yeah, it's a mess all the time. But
I was going to say, I think maybe the key difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is that like the right believes that we can influence other countries through war, and the left believes that we can influence other countries through trade. And that's like a neoconservative versus neoliberal.
They believe in both of those.
Yeah, unfortunately, Democrats and Republicans both believe in some heavy-duty war.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I was thinking
you use war to extract trade.
I think foreign policy on a left and right spectrum falls apart because foreign policy is such a different thing.
Yeah, they're really. Yeah, in my ideal world, there is no foreign policy, but I guess that's not realistic.
Right.
You're an isolationist, Michael?
I mean, I guess
a sovereign citizen.
I don't know where I lie. I mean, I basically think we just can't have a certain size society. Like, it has to be small. And it would be great if there was a way to, like, limit violence and, this sort of tendency of the strong to beat up the weak and grow stronger. But
did somebody mention Ishmael on the last podcast?
Yeah. Fran's read Ishmael. Fran, you told
Ishmael is my religion in some ways.
Okay, yeah. So he was like a neo-tribalist. He really felt that we should kind of. He was almost like a primitivist, the guy who wrote that book.
Yeah. And I read that, Fran, about when we were talking a lot about like intentional communities, and I remember reading that and like Walden 2. Yeah.
Well, what I'll say is, and something that I appreciate about it, I don't think it's feasible, but something that I appreciate about that line of thinking is that if you think of nature, right, like whatever you want to call nature, but biodiversity being the ultimate goal of any living thing on this planet, and how diversity always seems to be the key to success for a species, then it's really problematic to create a monoculture and globalization and like have everyone using the same paper money and the same Coca-Cola and the same McDonald's. Really what we need is like a really diversified species where everyone's sort of practicing their own culture.
I think we've reached
ultimately we end up with what we have now, which is like a failing culture, a culture that fails humans, right? We have this culture that makes everyone sick and it hits the whole world instead of just a small pocket.
I think maybe the issue is that we as humans have just grown smart enough to realize that we don't have to think like a species. We can think like individual. Whereas like other animals that follow this biodiversity principle, the individual is more willing to sacrifice for the good of the species than we might be. But I don't know that that's necessarily true. I mean, I can't really think of any living beings that do really practice true altruism. At least any
bees.
Like animals.
I'd say bees. Right?
Yeah, like a superorganism.
Yeah.
We're just not wired like bees. That is undeniable.
No, I don't know. Like my whole thing with I have these like fantasies myself of like just joining a commune or something. But the idea to me that like that could become the full world could go back into just like tribes. Like now that we have nuclear weapons or like just weapons in general that can destroy millions of people, I don't see isolationism as like viable foreign policy. Like I don't think U.S. foreign policy is great. I've read like different, like I read a lot of stuff about reducing the military budget, and then I read a lot of stuff saying that we don't have that option so much because of the way the world is structured.
I agree. I think the only possible form of isolation would be as a farce, right? Like we have some sort of ruling elite become invisible and basically set us up in these little pockets. That's the only plausible way to do it at this point, is to have a global network that's controlled out of sight.
Yeah, it's kind of like the genie is out of the bottle, and I'm not against putting it back in. I just don't see
Well, I don't know. There could be like a domino effect of like one country just decides, you know what, we want states, we don't want a federal government, and then other countries follow suit, and you end up with, instead of 200 odd countries, you end up with 3,000 odd states across the world, and then probably realistically they would conglomerate and assimilate and grow larger, and we'd be back in the same position with different people in charge. But
then the one country that decides not to go into states has an incredible amount of power over the countries.
I mean, they only do if they have a monopoly on something. If they're otherwise, and I don't want to sound like Milton Friedman, otherwise, if there was somehow a global market of isolationist communities, sorry, that doesn't even make sense. You can't have a global market.
Well, I do want to come back to Ishmael, where he divides cultures into leavers and takers, and basically the taker mentality is just a virus, right? Once you end up with one. If you divide the whole world up into all these different pockets, these tribes, all it takes is one tribe to be of the taker mentality, as in like they look at their neighbors and say, that's mine. And then they just grow up. Then that's essentially what happened, right? We had Mesopotamia with its birthplace of civilization, and then all of a sudden the whole world became Mesopotamian taker culture.
Do you remember what the solution was that he offers at the end of that book? Like I honestly don't remember. I'm trying to.
I think so. He wrote a follow-up to that book called The Story of B, where he talks a lot of, I think it becomes really problematic. He's about curtailing population, which I have come to not agree with.
There's a lot of problems there.
Yeah. That's his solution, is population growth is the problem. This was wrote in the early 90s, and he's like, we're about to hit like 5 billion people. And once we do that, it's over.
Yeah. We better clear out some, huh?
I also just kind of want to challenge the notion that like there was a better form of existence before this taker, migration or agricultural revolution. In that, like, if you look at chimpanzee studies, like I read that Jane Goodall book, In the Shadow of Man, it fucking sucks. It's awful. You do not want to be a chimpanzee. Like, it is terrible. And if you consider primitive man and you look at him today, do you think he's going to be better than both, or is he going to be somewhere in the middle? I think you have to look at it as generally being a positive trajectory, as opposed to some sort of like bell curve.
Yeah, I like half agree with you. I think there are things that we have lost since like the dawn of agriculture that have caused a ton of like depression, especially in the last century, right? Like a huge uptick in depression and anxiety, under the death of God and the awareness of our own like mortality and stuff like that. That we like an innocence that we've lost since we decided to become like civilizations. But again, like I have this argument with vegans all the time, other vegans who there's like a big argument about whether zoos are moral or not. And there seems to be this consensus that like all these animals that we have in zoos would be like so much happier if they were just out in the wild. And I'm like, listen, the wild is like horrific. There's predators and just parasites. You're sick all the time and you die like at half the life expectancy as you die in a zoo. So it's not as like clear cut. Like this return to nature would be as beneficial to your happiness as it seems like from Disney cartoon.
I think a younger version of myself would push back against that a lot. And again, turning to Ishmael, where he talks about like the forbidden fruit that humans ate was believing that, in the wild, it's left up to the sort of nature as to who lives and who dies. And the forbidden fruit that humans ate at the dawn of the agricultural revolution was we decide who lives and who dies. And it's that sort of mentality where all of a sudden you feel in control of your own mortality, right? Like, and that's what makes you so anxious and depressed, is that you think there's things you can do to prevent yourself from dying. And as true as that may be, you can probably live a happier existence if you just get blindsided by death instead of constantly being afraid of it.
It sounds like what happened to me was we basically psychologically evolved. Like we just had a radical shift. Like there was maybe a group of people that now have this new way of thinking, of, empowered thinking. And through, evolutionary selective forces, that became the dominant group, and that's how we all think now. I think it's totally reasonable to think that it's still happening today, and that what we're seeing with this change in narcissism, let me be charitable and give Lasch, take his point of view. What we're witnessing with this culture of narcissism now is just a biological, change in demographic, change in population. I don't know. I guess.
Wait, Michael.
Yeah.
What? I think I've had this argument with you before. You're saying that we have like a literal like different enough of a variance in our genetic structure from when we were 10,000 years ago when we were living like hunter-gatherer lifestyles. Like we've had like these like real psychic changes that aren't just cultural.
I think it's plausible.
Okay.
I mean, if you figure that, let's take a really simple example. Really horny people. Let's say being horny was hereditary. Well, they would just have a lot of kids, and eventually you would see, as a species, we've just gotten a lot hornier. I mean, I guess it's maybe a thought experiment is not called for.
We've had like 4 billion years to get horny, and everyone and everything is pretty much.
And I guess I'm not even saying 10,000 years. I'm saying, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'm saying on a pretty short scale that we could witness it as having occurred within a span of 500 years or something like that. I think that it is maybe plausible that certain personality types are genetic and those personality types are being bred out.
Okay.
I mean, feel like I've heard that something is only genetic within 1%. If it's only genetically advantageous if you find it in more than 1% of the species population. I don't have a source for that. I want to look it up.
In terms of human sexual reproduction, or just in terms of how evolutionary advantages?
Yeah, in terms of evolutionary advantages. It's how to differentiate between a fluke and a genetic modification that is beneficial for the species.
Okay, I mean, my understanding is that it can be any percent of a population can have this thing. Like, I mean, on a very large scale, like if you think about bacteria, like you can kill 99.9999% of them with some drug and leave this, 1/1000th remaining that have a genetic resistance, and then those ones will reproduce and they'll become the new population, and the entire new population will be different. So like a bottlenecking event there doesn't have to be a certain percentage of the population for it to work that way.
That makes sense.
There's something else I was going to say too.
Well, Mike, I'm just curious, where does bureaucracy fit in?
As bureaucracy is like an inborn personality trait.
Well, no, I mean, if you want to talk Lasch, you got to talk bureaucracy.
I don't think I got to.
How does state institutions affect what you're talking about?
Oh, I see.
Public and private bureaucracies and the intermingling of those.
It means it means like old and like ugly senators can have kids.
No, I think it's more than that. If I can just butt in, I think there's a lot of sort of thinking out there. Again, I wish I had a source for this, but a lot of people describing culture as its own organism, right? Like in much the same way that organisms, the culture evolves, and bureaucracy and the culture of narcissism is this sort of byproduct of a long lineage evolutions.
Yeah,
so, is this just biological determinism? Like we just, okay, it's just biology at work, and it's gonna keep going on this way.
I
like no human agency in this at all.
Oh, okay, no, that's no.
No political.
No, but that's not really the point I'm making. I'm not imposing a value. I'm just sort of trying to describe the mechanism. But I agree with you that there are universally good values that we should be pursuing. Like we have a moral imperative to try to be good people. I do believe.
And I think Christopher Lasch had a sort of, at one point I Googled Ubermensch and Christopher Lasch because I was like, is there like is he related? Is there some lineage in terms of his thinking of some sort of idealized form? I didn't find any connections, at least nothing that wasn't, there was something JSTOR words, but yeah, is Christopher Lasch saying there is a singular human, what we should all?
Does he, Nathan? I feel like I didn't.
No, definitely not. No, see, this is where you kind of get into the, when he talks about education. I think this is one aspect. Again, so right now, we have this, education's supposed to, accept everyone is different. But in a certain sense, all it says is, all it does is it creates a divide between those who were actually educating and those, he talks about it, the kind, half you educate seriously, half you kind of give the wink and the nod and the, turn the other way and ignore them, slacking off. Because really you don't give a shit about them learning because you've already written them off. And I'd say his point with education is don't write anyone off, and that just because, here's the thing, I think it's impossible for people to be the same, or there's a weird sort of thing I've heard about, with in schools that say wear uniforms or have a more regimented procedure. You actually have a lot more interracial diversity in terms of people interacting with each other across races, when you reduce the superficial. But in a normal school where everyone can wear what they want, you get a very racial clique. People kind of find their race and stick with that race.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of things that maybe we have to look at in a more complex way, and not just what does it look like? Does it look repressive? Are uniforms repressive or are uniforms liberatory?
I guess
because for say the poor student, having a uniform means you don't have to feel like shit. Or say having everyone all gets the same lunch. you know, like, oh, you don't have to feel like garbage because you can't buy a lunch. Like I've heard, you know, just recently, you know, of like students who like they'll completely pass up the state provided lunch because there's like everyone knows what that means, and it's very obvious if you are getting that as opposed to, you know, just getting instead of like say buying the lunch, you know, even if it's better, you know, because like
I don't know.
Like we understand.
I feel like you can take it too far though, and kind of have this very paternalistic control over others. And on some level, and not everybody has the ability to speak up, but it is important that agency is expressed before we do things that impact the will of others. At least in my view.
Well, Mike, I guess here's the point. Here's the point that I saw in the book again, is that we have a facade of individuality. We have a facade of everyone, you know, being unique individuals. But if you really look at the, you know, bureaucratic structures, the rules, you don't have that at all. Like it's incredibly repressive, incredibly limiting in terms of individual freedom. Mm-hmm. Like we're all pretty much managed like animals on some level. You know, we're not really treated as human beings that have the ability to take responsibility for ourselves. You know, we're treated like, I mean, Adam Curtis put it as like narcissistic piglet, you know, like, but, you know, we all think we're individuals, but if, you know, you look at like, what does Amazon see of us? You know, like when Amazon looks at, like, what does it see? Does it see, oh, here's a unique person? Or does it see, oh no, you're just like, you know, you're the exact same thing as all these other people, you know, that our algorithm has like found. And like, we know exactly what to do with you.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I feel like you're not going to like my response, which is that
No, go for it.
I think once you open the door to doing what is best for somebody on their behalf, personal freedom is over. Like it's just
Mike,
pragmatically, it's going to run away. And
Mike, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But that's the thing is we're already there. What me and you may disagree on is like, I think that's already the case. We're already being acted upon. The problem is we don't even see it.
Yeah.
The structure is so ubiquitous that we can't even see the chain. That's the point of the book as I saw it.
And I feel like
the relationship between individual narcissism and state and corporate bureaucracy and the culture of like therapeutic, you know, intervention is precisely that.
Okay.
People are not allowed to decide for themselves what they really want. It's already decided for you by experts.
I just think that having that perspective, that there's this invisible structure that is shaping the way that we think. We're not even aware of it. The way that the place that leaves us in as like reasonable people that are trying to figure things out so we can improve our situation is in a sense worse. I mean, maybe we will figure it out that way, but like we need to have some sort of epistemology or some sort of methodology or mode of analysis. Otherwise, we literally cannot make any movement forward. We just don't have the means to reason. And so, yes, we might have this we might have this flawed and warped epistemology, but really we have to work with it. And like we have to at least have something to replace it rather than criticize it, which I feel like is what Lasch did, and offer nothing in return. Like you shouldn't just criticize.
I guess I don't see that at all. I mean, I guess for me, like it seems pretty obvious, you know, that he's drawing the contour on this. I think the problem is if you just want to stay in the narcissistic bubble, are you really seeing it? Like you say, oh, you know, you need some epistemology, but what I guess the way I hear what you're saying is like, we need to avoid an epistemology. We need like an illusion.
I don't think we can fight how our brains are wired. I mean, ultimately, like we are wired to think rationally.
No, we're not.
Or I'm sorry.
I think I disagree with that.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. We are wired to look for reason. Maybe not be like impartial.
Also look for yeah. Because we're like socially, we look for social intent.
Yeah.
Because we're social animals. We see, and so we model other people.
Right. And I think that any epistemology, even not having an epistemology, like let's say we were trying to be herd animals and we just tried to live our lives, you know, to be good herd animals, it's going to collapse. Like we just can't, like maybe we can work on it, but like it's not, we have to acknowledge the way that our brains are wired. We can't just
I'm loving this.
Here's the thing.
I've got a few thoughts to add in though, if I can.
Yeah. Jump in.
I know you two got this sort of thread going, and I've got a couple. You know, I feel like I'm jumping back to some earlier parts of our conversation.
Please.
I think that you know, I would agree 100% with Michael here, where we have this sort of, you know, across the planet almost, we have this agreement that what we're striving for is individuals choosing their own destinies, right? Like that's the ultimate goal of a lot of, you know, what we do in this world is like we want to set people up to be able to like make themselves happy, right? And so Michael is having a sort of like reaction to
whose goal?
Like the big
whose goal is that people should be happy.
I guess happy is a not necessarily the most universal word, but sort of like the societal structure is trying to set us up to help ourselves, right? Like to do it ourselves, to have an individualized approach to life. And then like, you know, in Europe, they'll say like, hey, we're going to sort of regulate the crap out of businesses and out of your life so that more people are able to sort of like self-achieve, you know, like we're giving you a step ladder in the process. In the United States, we have this sort of anti-regulation stance, and I guess there's just a lot of disagreement about like what it looks like to give the support that they need to self-actual. I guess that's the word, self-actualization.
Oh, yeah, it's like you're describing a myth, and I feel like Nathan's trying to point out that the myth has like real power over it.
No, well, I'm trying to say there's two levels. There's two levels here. What you're talking about is what's said. It's the surface. But here's the thing. Where does any of that exist? And what in 2020 has shown that the institutions of power want us to be like self-actual? Like that's year of all years has been like, it just seems to me everything's stripped bare.
And that's why I come back to that question of left versus right. What is a leftist thought and what is the right thought? It almost seems like the right thinks I should have self-actualization while you don't. Whereas the left thinks we should all have self-actualization. And that might be across the world, is that type of divide between left and right. Is like the sort of like self-interested versus the group societally interested. Do you agree?
I mean, I don't think, I think that's way too broad because again, I don't think left and right in the, how do you call it? Say in American politics, left and right, there's really no difference. It doesn't matter.
Well, let's call
two
Biden,
sides of capital.
Let's call Biden on the right? Like everything since Clinton left has been right on the right.
Everything since Carter?
Carter seemed great.
I mean, you can go back to the 70s, you know, really.
But so those people are all on the right. But yeah, like this sort of, I don't know, community oriented thinking. I think, okay, wait. But just coming back to this idea of like the setting people up for self-actualization, I think there's a lot of disagreement about what that looks like, regardless of who you sit. And I think there's a lot of people who try to do this sort of ham-handed approach that I think rubs us all the wrong way, which is like this, you know, this is for your own good, is never good. And that's just overstepping this attempt at helping people self-actualize.
So would you say people on the right like to tell people what to do, but they themselves to be told what to do?
No, I would say people on the right are selfish. They think that there isn't enough resources on this planet for everyone to self-actualize, so they are going to self-actualize at the expense of others. It might be that might be the great divide between left and right. Also, is like the perception of abundance. I do think that on the left, you know, with all of our spending and whatnot, we kind of believe that like there's no shortage of stuff, money, food in this world. Whereas the right somehow thinks there's like this scarcity that we need to contend with.
It's the opposite thought though, because when I hear people talk about, this is me like listening to people on Twitter talk about economics. Like it seems like it's mostly on the left that I hear almost like a zero-sum view of economics, where if somebody else has money, if somebody doesn't have money, it's because somebody else has that money. Or if you have money, it's because you took it directly from somebody else, which isn't, you know, it's not entirely incorrect, but it's also, I feel like the view on the right is that, or the stated view on the right, I don't know if it's just, you know, how they justify doing what they do, but it's that if you free up regulation, then it increases capital for. So I don't know, I guess I just see like the exact opposite in the rhetoric on both sides. Does that make sense?
I think
it does make sense. I personally just see like the sort of enlightening moment is when someone realizes that, you know, humans are in charge of the production of money. So yeah, it's kind of infinite. If we all get on board with printing more of it, it's just not a good idea.
Look, there's a great debate out there happened in the middle of COVID with Steve Derrick Barn and an MMTer. I definitely, you know, recommend take a listen. It was I think it was hosted on Zero Books, but I mean, essentially the problem is if you're a Marxist and you believe that the fundamental source of value is human labor power, to say that there's enough money is just ridiculous. In a certain sense, like we're able to print money. And if you look at, say, David Graeber's book, Debt, essentially the reason why America is able to print money not infinitely, but to the ridiculous levels we do, is because we're the world reserve currency. And we're the world reserve currency because we're the largest army. We're the imperial power. So essentially if everyone wants our protection. You know, they want our good graces. You know, they don't want to have troops, so they like having American.
Yeah, and I think the issue is that we grow up learning this is the way it is, but we don't grow up learning that it's, maybe that's close to what you were saying, or is that like we just take it for granted that it's the way things are always going to work because we don't really see it that way. Step back and question it entirely.
Yeah, we're not very reflective on how things are actually working.
But there is this like big thing that's happened since Marx, which is this sort of Keynesian, I believe pronounced that right, economic Keynesian, thank you, where we have a set rate of inflation to keep this sort of, you know, another part of the clout of the American dollar is these so-called experts, in all truth, like, are very good at keeping this economic machine churning because, yeah, like we have this 2% figure, right? Like if we just keep inflation at 2%, the world will continue spinning and people will keep their money, and like this crazy economic thing is going to keep happening. I appreciate that you named the what's his name with the last name, the David Graeber, because he's the one that really looks at this and says like, wait, we're just perpetuating the system where a bunch of people are working and they don't have to be anymore because of we have achieved abundance, but we are.
Have you read Bullshit Jobs?
Yeah, exactly. He's the Bullshit Jobs guy. That's the one I read.
Yeah, fucking best, one of the best books ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, he died this year, you know?
No, I didn't know that. That's insane.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he was old. I thought he was kind of young.
He wasn't.
Wow.
He wasn't old at all.
Did he die of COVID?
I don't know the exact circumstances.
Have you guys?
It was a loss, that's for sure.
Have you guys read or know Mark Fisher?
Oh yeah, capitalist realism, baby.
I have that on my Kindle. I haven't touched it yet, but yeah.
Fran, have you heard of this guy?
No. What's his story?
Yeah, this book is right up your alley. It's basically like Society of the Spectacle 2.0. I mean, I haven't read a lot of critical theory, but it's like it was published in 2007, and so it talks about really a lot more relevant things. Like it opens talking about like Children of Men and like a lot of things that we grew up with. So it's really interesting. He's a really insightful guy, but another person who died much.
Interesting.
Well, he took care of himself. He chose it. You know, Graeber did not.
On that,
I remember Graeber, man, there was a debate between him and Peter Thiel, you know, and he was talking about like, well, why don't we have an immortality pill yet? Like, where's the magic pill that'll like solve all our health problems? Just in terms of, I mean, because he was an advocate for technological advancement. You know, he was not some Luddite. He was an anti-statist though.
Right.
Michael, I think I have to take off too.
Okay, well maybe this is a good place to end it.
Yep.
I'm gonna end the recording.